Hello there, everyone. Today is Good Friday, and we call it Good Friday, but it's really a terrible Friday for Jesus, but it ends up being good for us. So, I'm going to kind of give you a recap of what went on from last night's reading until today's reading. Um, Last night, Jesus was meeting with his disciples. They had the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, what we call the Lord's Supper now. And then he went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. And while he was there, he was handed over by Judas to the Romans. And there's something that's really bad about this because the Jewish culture said nothing could take place at night like that. You couldn't have a trial. You couldn't do all that kind of stuff at night. It had to be done during daylight. But Jesus was moved around repeatedly from different house to different house. He was actually beaten and tried and all kind of stuff according to the religious leaders at the time's system, and found guilty of basically blasphemy, like saying that he was God or the Son of God. And so what I want you to start reading tonight is Matthew chapter 27, and you need to read verses 1 through 61. I'm not going to read all of that tonight. I'm just going to kind of do a quick synopsis of what's going on. So Jesus is betrayed there. After Jesus is taken, Judas is so riddled with guilt that he comes and tries to return the 30 pieces of silver that he was given the day before. The religious leaders say, "Hey, we're not taking that. You need to, you've done this. We're not taking that back. That's blood money. We're not taking that." So Judas goes and hangs himself, and they take the silver pieces that he brought back and say, "Well, we can't keep this in the temple." So they bought what's called the Potter's Field, which is where people would be buried from that point on, which fulfilled prophecy from further back in the Bible. Next thing that happened is Jesus goes to face Pilate, who's the Roman governor, so to speak, of the time there that's ruling over Jerusalem. And, they bring him to him and say, "Hey, you got to hang this guy because of these laws that he's broken of our religious laws." And Pilate goes and quizzes him. Is like, "Man, there's nothing. I can't find anything to hang this man for, to kill him for, to crucify him for." And they say, "Well, you got to do it, because you're going to cause an uproar if you don't. This is part of our religious system. You got to do it." So Pilate says, "Well, it's customary to release one person, so I'm going to allow the people to decide." So he brings them up, and that's where I'm going to read for you tonight is Matthew chapter 27, and we're going to read verses 15 through 26. So let me give you just a second to get up here. So it says, "Now at the feast the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, 'Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ?' For he knew he had handed him over because of envy. He knew they had handed him over because of envy. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, 'Have nothing to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him.' But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, 'Which of the two do you want me to release to you?' They said, 'Barabbas.' Pilate said to them, 'What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?' They all said to him, 'Let him be crucified.' Then the governor said, 'Why? What evil has he done?' But they cried out all the more, saying, 'Let him be crucified.' Then Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising. He took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, 'I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it.' And all the people answered and said, 'His blood be on us and on our children.' Then he released Barabbas to them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified." So he gave the people a chance. The same people that were shouting Hosanna, praising Jesus on Palm Sunday, here on Good Friday, are the same people that are yelling to crucify him. So Jesus was scourged. I mean, you can look up what goes on in that, a cat of nine tails with bones and shards of metal and just flesh being ripped off of his body. It's just a horrific death, and then being crucified. So after after he's crucified, the soldiers there gather around and mock him, saying, "Hey, we're gonna gamble for his clothing, and put a sign on him. He's the King of the Jews, all that kind of stuff. You can read through that in the rest of chapter 27 there. And then Jesus dies. And when Jesus dies, something miraculous happens. There was an earthquake, and there's a veil between the Holy of Holies, which is where like the Ark of the Covenant and that kind of stuff, where the priest every year went behind that veil to pray and ask for atonement for the sins of the nation of Jerusalem. And only he could go back there. And that veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple was very important because only that priest could go back there. But when Jesus died and the earthquake happened, that veil split in half, and that's very symbolic because we no longer have to have a high priest to go to God for us because we have Jesus as our high priest. He's the intermediary between us and God. You no longer have to wait for that to happen each year. And then from there, Jesus is buried in the tomb, and that's where we're going to pick up tomorrow. So I know it's kind of long-winded tonight, guys, but a lot going on in this day in particular. So hope you join us tomorrow night. Remember, I love you. God bless you. And y'all keep praying.